sandwiches. It's probably the best place to eat in Ann Arbor, at least when I was there many, many, many years ago. I know I'm sharing my slide. I just need to fix the view for you. Oh, shoot. Okay, give me a sec here.
We're seeing the presenter mode.
Yep. It's always, online with a little laptop. It takes a little time. But thank you so much. What I hope to do in the time that I have together is to show you what we're doing across NIH in ontologies and standards and how important that work is for the larger mission of data science, to connect all of our data, to enhance our software, and to really create a digital and data health ecosystem. So I can't tell you everything that we do in our Office of Data Science Strategy that coordinates and catalyzes data science across the 27 NIH institutes and centers, but I can do a slice of life on data science at NIH that I hope will be of interest. And where I want to start is probably what is most interesting to everybody in the research community right now, which is the exciting time we live in for data sharing and data science. It's a priority not just for our agency, but also for the administration and for Dr. Biden. Scientific data serves as a catalyst for every biomedical breakthrough and every new treatment that reaches patients. Sharing scientific data requires researchers to think about how they want to share their data at the onset of their research experiment or research endeavor. So an important part of planning for data sharing is the plan for the collection, the description of the metadata, and this requires the understanding and using of ontologies and standards. So really, if we want to be effective in data sharing, we really have to be effective in the way that we enhance ontologies and enhance standards and make that a part of our data sharing culture. So you guys are at the forefront of data sharing. There's been some really interesting breaking news that has happened that I'm pretty sure you're also aware of. You've probably read the August 25 OST memo. This memo issues guidance on making federally funded research freely available and without delay. So it directs agencies, all agencies, to update our public access policies as soon as possible, to make publication and research funded by taxpayers publicly accessible without any embargoes or cost. So all agencies will be updating our policies, including NIH, that will end any 12-month embargoes or any barriers to freely accessible publications and research findings. And this will need to happen by December 31st of 2025. So January 1st of 2026 will be an exciting day. You may also be aware of the May 26th memo at OSTP issued on the guidance to ensure federally funded research data are equitable and beneficial for all Americans. And this guidance clearly contains the defined characteristics for two classes of online research data repositories that basically make all data open and freely available, and then a specific class that has considerations for the sharing of human data, including additional security and privacy considerations. NIH was really pivotal in the construction of those desired characteristics for data repositories, just calling out Jerry Sheehan, who led our effort here. And so you can see that these memos points to trends in the administration that support equitable access to data and to research results and to publications from scientific findings that are results from federal funding. I think that, this really does help us understand how committed our administration is and our agencies are to open data sharing. So from our perspective, NIH believes that data sharing sparks new research collaborations. It enhances the rigorous study designs. It enables unique data combinations and facilitates reproducibility. So we're really excited with our new data management sharing policy that will go into effect fairly soon. So let me just talk about that data management sharing policy just for a few moments. I'm sure that you will have some questions, no doubt. But as you know, the policy goes into effect on January 25 of next year. It requires researchers who are applying for NIH funding to prospectively plan for data sharing by submitting a data management sharing plan. This policy applies to grant applications, it applies to contracts, it applies to other transactional authorities, and even to our intramural research staff. It doesn't necessarily apply to folks who are putting in training applications, or if you're putting in an equipment application, or if you're doing research, doing work that has non-research data, so administrative data, for example. We do anticipate that researchers will outline the protections of the privacies and rights and confidentiality of the data, that you would be abiding by existing laws and regulations and policies, and that you do have the opportunity to justify limits for data sharing for technical reasons, for ethical reasons, or for legal factors. So you do have the opportunity to tell us in which ways data would be restricted from being shared. What would go into your plan? So we strongly recommend that your plan outlines the type of data that you would like to preserve and share, the related research tools, the software, the codes that are needed to access or to manipulate the data. Importantly, the standards, the metadata, the ontologies, the way in which the data will be preserved and accessed, so which repository, are there persistent unique identifiers, how long will the data be shared, and how will it be available, any factors for data access, distribution, or reuse, including limitations for those factors, and then an overall data management, how will you monitor and manage your data and by whom. So you can see a little additional information in the supplemental note there, elements for the data management sharing plan. So where will all this data go? That's a question that many folks have asked. So and this is what I'm going to spend the next section of my talk on. So as a first stance, we do encourage the use of established community repositories. These help researchers identify appropriate repositories, the types of persistent unique identifiers, qualifying metadata, any factors that are quality assurances. There's a link here on the slides that you can see a list of NIH-supported data repositories. They're actually from a site called BMIC, B-M-I-C, from NLM. There's a wonderful website, sharing.nih.gov, that lists all these as well. And if you're a grantee of particular ICs, they may designate a data repository. So, for example, Child Health designates DASH as their designated data repository for a lot of their research. So let me just talk a little bit about fair data, trust repositories, and management and sharing. You may or may not know, but we make available almost 200 petabytes of data on 3 clouds, Google, AWS, Microsoft Azure. You can just see a listing of the different types of data that are available on the cloud service providers. This is a lot of data, managing data on 3 clouds at this scale. Finding data in a petabyte search these are all non-trivial. So this is a really wonderful time to be in data science. There's a lot of data available, but it's kind of messy, as you can imagine. One of the things that we've been doing over the past 2 years is to work with most of our institutes and centers to bring NIH-supported collaborations in biomedical data and data research together with data management expertise as well as artificial intelligence expertise to make existing NIH data more AI-ready and more fair. So this is going to be a lot of stories about impugning metadata. So over the past 2 years, we've made 73 awards of about $21 million. And you can see some of the common focus areas: Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and aging, and data types. Not surprising when you're making data more fair, imaging, EHRs, and omics data, but also a lot of really interesting work in microbes and pathogens and even speech. There's a lot of really interesting work in AI, fair data, and speech that's been started from, for example, Alexa. So I'd like to just tell you the story of 3 different ways in which researchers are improving the AI readiness or the fair readiness of existing data. There's the story of Phil Brown, who is working on a training activity, and what he'd like to do is to prepare researchers as successful data analysts' careers. They're exploiting the power of AI and ML, and what he's doing is he's providing training to graduate students and postdocs and how to prepare data, how to make it more AI ready. What does it mean to have rigorous and reproducible data? How can we understand ethical issues around data and around algorithms? So this is really nice hands-on training around FAIR principles for storing and accessing data. And John Gilmore, he's working as an R01 investigator, and he's got a really great study to link imaging data to identify children who might be at risk for schizophrenia. And this is time dynamic imaging data. And so what he's doing is he's bridging missing data points by impugning out of distribution data from the existing data points during the time domain. So really nice work on using out of distribution AI techniques. And then there's the work of Carl Kesselman and Face-Based Consortium. This is a network of researchers who are interested in cranial facial development and dysmorphia. Face-Based Hub and Face-Based Infrastructure is one of the key repositories that the Institute of Cranial and Dental Research does support for their relevant research community, and he's streamlining ways in which we can curate data using AI approaches and improving the metadata descriptions. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the interesting things that Carl and his team are doing in Face-Based. So these are just 3 examples: training, investigator-initiated and data repository work, all to improve the fairness or AI readiness of existing data. So where will all this data go? There's a lot of options, and the first thing that I want to say is that we recognize that there's really no one-size-fits-all solution for how researchers are going to share data. There are a lot of different expectations, a lot of different communities, and a lot of different needs for how researchers might want to share their data. And we at NIH need to try to address all of these to the best of our ability. So for example, an investigator can share their data as part of their supplemental material that's provided with association of their publications. And they can share this via PubMed Central, so the far left-hand side of the figure. PubMed Central data are shared through our Strides partnership with AWS on their open data sponsorship platform, and they can be found and cited and used, but they're found through the publications. Researchers can also share their data and other digital materials from their efforts through a number of journals repositories, and I'll talk a little bit more about that effort in a moment. And finally, as you've seen earlier, you can provide data through our Strides partnership. It's a partnership with AWS, Google, and Microsoft Azure, and the data can be stored and made accessible on those Strides cloud providers. And again, we have just about 200 petabytes of data on the cloud. But I do want to stress as a first choice that we strongly encourage researchers to share their data in an appropriate and open access domain-specific repository. Researchers can find a list, again, of all of those repositories that NIH supports and more from the website that's linked there. That's the BMIT website, nih.gov. So we recognize that databases, knowledge bases will come in different sizes and different complexities and different levels of maturity. And each has a potential to bring significant value to the research area that it supports. But these are all in different stages of maturity, and they have a sort of different level and spectrum of readiness to adhere to, for example, the characteristics of a desired repository, or to align to the FAIR principles, or to align to the trust principles that I'll talk about in a minute. Moreover, NIH is really interested and would like to encourage and is working with a number of repositories to develop metrics for evaluating the usage, the utility, and the impact of a given repository, likely over several different aspects. So let me just take a moment to tell you a little bit about one of our new initiatives. This is the GRAY initiative, the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative. It's a way to create a greater connectivity and collaboration across the Generalist repositories. Again, Generalist repositories offer additional capabilities to share data and to share scientific digital projects that are a result of research. So quite early this year, or very, very late last year, I think it was literally the week of Christmas that we launched this new program. This is currently a collaboration between 6 journals repositories, and you can see them listed on the bottom of the slide, but I'm really happy to announce that there will be a 7th repository that will be added. The announcement will go out potentially even this week, all with the goal to make data sharing easier, to improve the discoverability of NIH-supported data across these repositories, to enhance rigor and reproducibility and develop data sharing as a core metric across repositories, and to encourage the reuse of our NIH data through training and through engagement with research communities. Let me just tell you some of the goals of our initiative. Again, it's to align with our desired characteristics of data repositories and to help researchers and repositories understand how to do that, to implement ways in which you can search for NIH data across repositories. This is definitely a goal of my office, is the thought of looking across different repositories to find data of interest, to develop in some way some consistent metadata models that we can use across repositories to make it easier to reuse and to find data, to look at ways in which we can connect our digital objects, supporting use cases, for example, and implementing those open metrics and sharing those with repositories. Of course, we want to do a lot of outreach and workshops on how do you actually share data, how do you make data more fair and more findable, and provide those educational materials to researchers and to repositories. So we're super excited to be a part of the GRAY initiative. There's been a number of webinars. I think the next one will be on October 12th. And if you look on our website, you'll be able to find more information about the GRAY webinars and all the work that they're doing. The next activity that we've just done, and I'm so super excited about this, is to support the long-term provenance and findability and citation of NIH-supported data. So if we want to really make data sharing effective, we actually have to be able to cite it and make it a citable product of research. So this consortium membership that we've literally just signed off on in July will support all of our NIH institutes, and it will offer the assignment of persistent identifiers for scientific output. That could be data, it could be software, it could be reports. We'll also provide sort of a technical and administrative support for our NIH data repository. So you can see sort of the structure and the flow of this. Each of the ICs is under the NIH consortium umbrella, and under the ICs, there's a number of repositories. So for cancer, it could be the Cancer Research Data Commons, and from NIAID, it could be IMPORT, and from NIMH, it could be the Mental Health Data Archive, NDR. Each partnership is expected to have a significant impact on the way that we can streamline metadata, its collection, the use and the search of data. We hope to be developing metrics and measures for how data is used and reused. We hope to develop best practices and guidelines for our NIH repositories and researchers on how to use persistent identifiers and how to preserve and cite data in digital objects. So not only are we a member of the DataCite Consortium, but we also have an administrative core that will help our ICs and our repositories in this effort. So I'm really glad that we can support this way to make data more citable and findable in a first-class research object. So, as I've said, data repositories come in all different shapes and sizes and levels of maturity. Positioning those data repositories for fair data sharing and to align to the OSTP metrics for success, to adhere to the FAIR principles and to support the trust principles. And just very briefly, trust stands for transparency of function, responsibility for data stewardship, user-focused community-driven capabilities, the sustainability to ensure uninterrupted access to the data, and then attention to technologies. Those are the trust principles. So aligning our repositories to do all of this work is not a unfunded mandate from NIH. So we have been supporting supplements for existing repositories, and you can see just a few of them listed there on the left over the past 2 years. Biomedical areas where repositories are focused and are of interest in this supplement include Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, obesity, nutrition, mental health, immune response, environmental data, vision, and ontologies, and the types of data that are supported, of course, imaging, behavioral data, clinical claims data, EHR, omics, environmental health data, brain, speech, and language. So this has been a great program, and I just want to show you one example of a knowledge base that came in this year for supplemental funding. And I did not actually share this slide beforehand with the PI, so I hope this is not a surprise, but we're really pleased to support the supplement from the Monarch Initiative. As you all know, data is heterogeneous in format, in identifiers, and schema. It's really quite a challenge. And so what the PI would like to do is to provide an improved method for graph representations, as well as community-controlled dashboards and schemas and diagrams. So this will also be a collaboration with FAM, the NIH-supported project that generates precision disease animal models with patient-specific variants in cells and organisms. And these are model organisms like worms, zebrafish, mice, rats. So they'll be working to develop a data capture schema that is computable by resources such as the biodata translator, the model organism databases, and other diagnostic tools. I think what the hope is that the outcome will be a sophisticated information system to collect and search and compare diverse and often mutually incompatible model data, organism data. So it's interesting to look at this. I do want to call out something that's somewhat related in terms of deep work into graph representation. There's a recent report by NSF on the Open Knowledge Network. It's worth looking at that. It's worth looking at where NSF and the larger agency community is moving in terms of developing graph representations for larger knowledge networks. So I just want to call that out, and also to call out the work that we're doing to support ontologies and standards. We do have a program that funds mature data repositories and knowledge bases. This is a program that's been in place since 2020. This does support investigator-initiated sustained data resources, sort of as core data resources. All of these resources need to fill a scientific gap. They do need to adopt good management practices, to engage the research community, as well as to govern for life cycle management. Applications will need to address the quality of data services and methods that increase efficiency of operations, such as, for example, ways in which to automate curation or QA and QC. We encourage the leveraging of cloud infrastructure, for example, using Strides. It's not a requirement. We do encourage it, though. We also would like applicants to articulate engaging strategies with their scientific communities and with the journals, and to align with particular focus areas. So you can see a number of the applications that have been funded. We've received 64 applications since 2020, and we've awarded 16 awards. And most notably in the last year, as I'm going to show you, we've funded a fairly large number of ontologies in our data ecosystems through these funding announcements. So you can see a list of the recently funded ontology efforts: Phoenix, which I'm sure you're pretty familiar with; Violin 2, it's the vaccine information ontology linked, oh, sorry for the typo, knowledge base. We've also supported the Human Disease Ontology data resource, Gene Ontology Consortium and knowledge base, and the HEMON knowledge base. So that's a knowledge base to connect relationships and models that's not really easily represented by binary relationships. So just a number of knowledge bases and ontology work that's come in the past year to these funding announcements is really exciting. These funding announcements will be reissued in 2023 with some changes that address some challenges. And I hope that those changes in the FOAs will be effective for the community. And I do appreciate the community support. Right now, we have over half of the NIH institutes and centers signed on to the funding announcements, and that number is growing. So if I can, in the second half of my talk, I'd like to focus a little more on some very specific work that NIH is doing on ontologies and standards. The work of ontologies to work and reason with concepts and relationships that is very closely mirrored to the way that we perceive concepts is fascinating and quite interesting. What are some of the activities that we hear that are important? Ontologies are used for biomedicine, for describing entities, biological entities, for specifying information models, for enabling natural language processing, and for specifying data exchange and formats and semantics of data, and for information integration, as well as for providing sort of a reference of encyclopedic knowledge and enabling computer reasoning with the data. So certainly high motivation for using ontologies. I'm borrowing this from my colleague, Pruvish. So where we mostly are is kind of in a messy world of a lot of heterogeneous data that's created for a primary use to address a very specific research question or as part of a clinical study, or for example, to get early use authorization for a device or a drug. So it's an important part of our research and healthcare enterprise, but it is a little bit messy. Giving data a second life is like data and information mining, finding value, and in some cases significant value from the reuse of research and clinical and healthcare data is quite important. But this data, for the most part, is quite messy, quite heterogeneous, lacks specific metadata or formats that make reuse quite challenging. So where we might want to go is the first vision is to create data that's findable and easily accessible and interoperable. That's fair. It's sort of like a data organizational framework. You can see it illustrated, and this is Pruvish's illustration of like a stacks, data stacks, where FAIR is really represented in a very visual way. But if you think about it in a 2022 view, perhaps it's more like a data web. But going from messy to FAIR data is no easy task. We've been doing this by providing supplements to NIH investigators. But it's quite a bit like herding cats. So let me tell you some of the cat herding that we've been doing here at NIH, and that's the story of common data elements and metadata collected at the onset of awards. I'll tell you a little bit about a few of these. HEAL, for example, helping end addiction long-term. Radx, the program I work on, and Recover, another program I work on. And then there's the Accelerating Medicines Partnership and the Common Fund Data Ecosystem, all working to collect, in some ways, metadata at the onset of the awards. And then there's the mapping of data models to, for example, fast healthcare interoperable resources and normalizing data values. The National COVID Cohort Collaborative, M3C, has been leading a lot in this mapping of data models, but so is the All of Us program and the NCI Data Aggregator. And then there's harmonizing biologic concepts across model organisms, the work of the Alliance for Genome Research. And then finally, I'll end on the story of engaging a community to iteratively develop metadata and data models from the work of the Dental Institute's Face-to-Face Award. So let me tell you a little bit about the Common Fund data ecosystem. While many programs and awards in Common Fund have very specific data coordinating centers, coordinating across all of those data coordinating centers and creating a harmonized data ecosystem from the Common Fund programs is quite a hard goal. So what they're doing is that they're essentially working to create a portal that harmonizes the metadata descriptors across all of the coordinating centers of the Common Fund into a common metadata model. And what they hope to accomplish from this is to create a search portal that allows you to find the data and query across the coordinating centers, find the data, and then reuse it. So they can collect information about the data sets, species, the disease, and anatomical systems that are involved in a way that they can streamline the collection of metadata from the coordinating centers. So this has been an effort that's been ongoing for about 3 years, with making some progress in terms of creating metadata catalogs. Creating common data elements it is another effort that we've been working on. Generally, data is collected somewhat in an unstructured study from independent studies, and then you harmonize it at the back end or later. This is, as I'm sure you're very well aware, this is quite highly inefficient. It takes an enormous amount of time, mostly at the postdoc and grad student level, wrangling the data with QA, QC, and harmonization. So what the work of many of our systems do now is to create structured data through common data elements and then validate those on submission, primarily through a coordinating center, and then further submission to the data resource. So this is certainly something that's happening in the HEAL initiative. HEAL is helping end addiction long-term. Metadata powers the suite of tools that are being developed by HEAL and by their researchers to intuitively discover data. HEAL is quite diverse. There's a number of researchers in the scientific community who would like to engage with the HEAL data ecosystem and to use the data. So what they do is they both ensure that a broad and granular level of metadata is collected across all of the HEAL studies, so that they can leverage this metadata through multiple repositories in their ecosystem. So they provide minimal information necessary to support the HEAL community by providing metadata that can serve as a foundation for their activities and data interoperability. And they integrate this into the NLM's data model to the extent that's possible. So in this way, it's sort of a bottom-up and a top-down approach. There's an internal NIH working group that provides input onto the HEAL Pain clinical course, common data elements, and then from the investigators and researchers to further supplement the common data elements. It's still quite a challenge, but one of their goals is to have common data element models across all of the HEAL program and then through to the different repositories where the HEAL data is deposited. Another effort that we're working on is the BRIC system, Biomedical Research Information Computing System. So whenever possible, they do use standards. Their data is structured. They have a number of common data elements, which are highly curated across the BRIC system. And they have a number of other activities, such as persistent identifiers. There's a number of activities that they do to create greater interoperability, including Research Auth Services, which is sponsored by my office, as well as adherence to the data and metadata DATS 2.0 standards. An activity that I've been working on for quite a while is the Radx program. Radx is the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics initiative to speed the innovation in the development and commercialization of testing devices for COVID-19. So there's a number of programs that are part of Radx. There's the Radx Up initiative that addresses factors associated with COVID-19 and underrepresented and underserved populations. There's a high degree of mortality in those populations due to COVID-19. And so Radx Up looks to understand the rates of infection and or those who are most at risk for complications or poor outcomes from the pandemic. Radx Tech is the initiative that really, it's like the Shark Tank. It really speeds the development and validation and commercialization of point of care and at-home testing devices for Radx, for COVID-19. Radx Rad is the initiative that supports non-traditional approaches to testing devices. This could be wastewater treatment or other types of at-home testing devices. And then digital health is a part of the Radx community. It's those wearable devices, mobile health apps that provide additional insights into the spread of COVID-19. So each of these components of the Radx program have a coordinating center. They're all collecting data. They've all, at the start of the project, collected a defined set of common data elements. So every study, every researcher who is funded through Radx is collecting a set of the same common data elements. And then in addition, there are additional common data elements that are very specific for each program. Each of the coordinating centers harmonize and provide a data model for the data that's collected. All of those are then aggregated together in the Radx Data Hub, that Data Hub provides integrated workflows and services to accommodate the data from all of Radx programs, linking also with the digital health data to provide a sort of a way for researchers to look across the pandemic, at least in terms of the data we've collected for testing devices. So harmonizing data across programs that have to deal with underserved population data and survey data and uptake of testing devices, along with very innovative technologies in terms of wastewater treatment and digital health and wearable data is very hard. It's an advanced harmonization plan. So one of the things that they're doing is that they're looking at how they can enhance and reuse collaborations from across NIH in terms of the collection of common data elements and common data models. They are incorporating all of these into a common Radx data repository for data elements and establishing a gold standard set of common data elements and data models for all of the data that's generated throughout the Radx program in a way to then make it easier for researchers to use by developing a web service and an interface for researchers to basically reuse the data in a way that makes workflows much more easier. So the launch for the Data Hub is fairly soon, and we've been harmonizing aggressively across hundreds of studies of very diverse data. I mean, I hope at some point one of the PIs will be able to tell you about their experience in how you harmonize large, very heterogeneous data at a large scale and a rapid pace. I want to also tell you a little bit about the work that Dr. Kesselman and Schuler are doing in the face space. Face space, from their view, is a hybrid repository. It's quite flexible. It adapts to new species. I've said, face space is a repository that does collect images and data and information from cranial facial dysmorphia research funded from the Dental Institute. They have a self-service style of data curation and metadata model development, and I thought it was worth just bringing up what they're doing and how they're doing it. So they create structured metadata, and then they have an in-the-loop user process. So they begin with the established standards and published data structures, and then they involve the user community in the design and evaluation of those models, and it's an iterative process. So with each new iteration, the improvement to the data models and to the structures, it goes forward and it adapts to the vocabulary of the research at times. So I thought it was sort of an interesting approach. It's certainly something to consider, but in the end, of course, as we all agree, the standardization of metadata is key to all harmonization efforts, and then creating that consistent and minimal and shareable metadata and data models is something that I think we're all trying to strive towards. And then you can see from the work that we did in Radx, it's very, very much a process of looking across systems and developing models. And here, this is an adaptive approach involving the communities. But there's always challenges in general for repositories. We all have to sort of evolve at the speed of science. We need to provide enough structure and guidance to empower scientists to really create fair data sets. And we're trying to do this in many different ways at NIH. And also consider the life cycle of data and of the repositories. We all know that there's going to be some real challenges to when we think about harmonization of data, and that's true certainly in population studies. There's quite a lot of unique measures and questionnaires in population studies that make it fairly challenging. Furthermore, in work where there's clinical reports or case studies, this is also very, very challenging. And finally, there may not be one size fits all. There's the approach of the community and the loop approach. And then there's sort of the large-scale harmonization done by curation and experts. Where are we thinking the future might lie for NIH in terms of fair data, trust repositories, data management, data sharing? Our hope is to promote fairness, not just across data repositories, but also across digital research objects such as research code to create a fully interoperable research ecosystem. We hope to do that by implementing open and computable schema and metadata and data dictionaries or models and supporting common data elements. We want, of course, to have interoperability across our data and our systems, and potentially to enable larger scale data discoverability across our repositories and our data systems. So to do that, we see that we need to develop tools to support the annotation of data and to facilitate the creation of interoperable and fair data. And we also think that there's probably good ways to think about minimal standards or schemas or API to support APIs that would promote computational interoperability across our resources. Some of these things we are currently working on, and then others are new areas of research that I hope the community will work with us on. So thinking about the future, what are some ways in which we could create greater harmonization capabilities across, or at least across some of our larger projects, such as Radx or Recover for Long COVID, or HEAL, Helping an Addiction Long-Term, or the BRAIN Initiative? Are there ways in which we could think about consistent, computable, and findable data elements with consistent models that would make larger scale harmonization make sense? There are just two other things I want to share with you, sort of as a shameless advertisement for activities that might be of interest to you or to your students. There's the NIH Data and Technology Advancement National Data Service Scholars Program. This is a 1 or 2 year national service sabbatical at NIH, working in high impact areas. We hope to bring into NIH data science experts or experts in artificial intelligence or ontologies to advance our mission. We bring actually more than 5 fellows a year. It's been on average 7 to 8 fellows. We partner with all of the institutes and centers on this activity. Some example projects include iHealth data interoperability through iGene, making AI data ready for pandemic preparedness through Recover, and through the work that NIBIB and cancer are doing. Oh goodness, sorry, that happened on its own. Automating consumer health information. An area that we've been working on recently is wearables to predict clinical outcomes. Data harmonization on wearables and digital health data is particularly challenging. We're also looking at multimodal data, in particular for cancer, AI for genomics, and then AI, of course, for medical imaging and clinical data. And then there was a new partnership for advancing medicines. We have a number of, these are our scholars from last year. We are now bringing on our 2022 scholars. You can see who they are and what they're working on. All colleagues who come from academia, from other agencies, from nonprofits, or from industry, working within NIH and within the institutes and centers to make a big impact on the work that we do. And finally, I do want to highlight our data sharing and data reuse seminar. It's on the second Friday of each month at noon. This is an opportunity for my office to highlight the work that each of our institutes and centers are doing in data sharing and data reuse, and you get to hear not only from the program staff about their initiatives and the programs that they support, but also from a key researcher that's funded by that institute. And you can see a number of the folks that have presented in the past. Karen Adolph, who has a really fantastic Databrary, which is a data repository for sharing research videos from child health encounters. Pruvish, he is he considers himself a data parasite. He has a wonderful talk on accelerating clinical translation using heterogeneous and public data. I borrowed one of his slides from my talk. And then Alex Ropolinsky has a brain imaging library that's a resource for sharing microscopic data. Nobody can actually do this work by themselves. Our office coordinates with over 23 institutes and centers with over 200 staff. Each of those folks contribute to these activities, They run funding initiatives or supplements. They run workshops. They work on harmonization through developing common data elements. We had a great working group that worked on this for Radx, and all the thanks really goes to them and to Asaya, who is a data scholar at NIH working on data interoperability. She herds the cats of how you create interoperable systems in the cloud that make it easier for researchers to log on to those systems once, navigate across those systems, aggregate data, and then do comparative analysis in the cloud across multiple systems. It's not an easy task, and she's doing a marvelous job. And with that, our office is a small office. We coordinate across NIH to create a modernized and integrated fair data biomedical ecosystem. We're continuing to evolve in our strategies through our strategic plan for data science. And I hope that you'll follow us along and work with us as we continue this adventure in data science. And with that, Asaya, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm pretty sure that I've left lots of time for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of activity. Even it's the first time to hear. So there are a lot of hands up. I'm going to give to Chris, Joshua, and then Oliver. Chris, go. Okay, so if you have a question, and we will talk in front of the stadium. All right.
All right. Hi, Susan. Great talk.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, that's really fantastic stuff. I'd love to see what you're doing in your office kind of replicated in other agencies like DOE and so on. But my question is, so I saw lots of these kind of all projects using very specialized CDE repositories. When I look at a lot of these CDE repositories, I'm not an expert, but it looks like a lot of using kind of old, not very semantic technology. There's a lot of duplicative data elements with terms that are already in OBO. How do we know we're not just kind of making more and more duplicative terms, and what are kind of plans for being able to kind of link these to ontologies a little bit better?
You have reached the same question that I have reached, actually. And I completely agree with you. I think that if you look at the library of CDE data repositories, it's a Chinese menu of over 100 different, more than 100, really quite a large number of different but duplicative or fairly similar common data elements, which I think doesn't serve the scientific community. Each program that starts, for example, Recover or others, reinvent the wheel in a slightly different cast. And I think that there's a lot that could be done in just applying some really creative semantics. This is something that I would really like to do. And to do so, I need a lot of buy-in from our NIH colleagues. But you have hit it right on the head. There is a lot of really good work that could be done if we just look a little bit about how we can develop a greater semantics in utilizing OBO. So, connect with me offline and let's see what we can do.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, fantastic talk. So my name is Joshua Fortreed. I work at Cincinnati Children's. I primarily work on two different DCCs, LungMap and the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network. And I've also worked with Import, which I saw you mention there, so fantastic. So I've worked with a lot of researchers, and most researchers are not experts in data curation, data management, CDEs, ontologies, metadata. And while the NIH has a lot of these data coordinating centers, not every research group and research institution are covered by these. And so my question would be, what is the NIH doing at the individual grant or institution level to help promote these fair standards? As you say, trying to take messy data, transform it to fair data is hard. And it's especially hard if you're not the one who generated the data. So what type of work is the NIH doing at kind of the ground level there?
That is a great question, and I do acknowledge that what we're doing is probably going to be a little bit like a drop in the very large ocean. It has started and it's ramped up this year. We've provided a number of training activities. Most of the training activities are around how do you construct a data management sharing plan, but our office partnered with NLM to work with the Data Curation Network to start to provide a little bit more in-depth training on how do you create fair data from the onset. What do you think about in terms of creating metadata? Those trainings will be online. Researchers can access them, but I also agree that we do need to do more. There are some activities in the works in terms of creating data stewards. I'll just call out HEAL, for example. So one of the things that the HEAL program does is they have a data stewards program. That program works with the HEAL investigators who are described exactly as you did, who really do need that shepherd help in creating data that can be shared and reused. So those data stewards work with the investigators. They provide ways to create fair data and then also provide help in terms of where that data go and what repository. I think that could be replicated at a little larger scale where our office is looking into it, but these are probably small steps in the right direction, I hope, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
So just a follow up on that, would the intent be that, you know, whenever an institution or a lab gets a grant funding, that they at that point they're partnering with the data center that will be holding the data, so that the lab knows, okay, this is the type of data I need to collect, and I need to collect it somewhat in this format, because, you know, research takes years, and sometimes it's hard to go back to the lab notebooks, or the person's left, or they just didn't write it down. And so would you propose trying to have them start very early on connecting with the data centers in their research?
I would love that. I would love to see researchers engaging, you know, at the onset of even when they're writing their grant, engaging with the data coordinate centers, the repositories, or even their librarians who are being trained in this and can really help them. So we've been advocating through NLM to enhance the librarian sciences to help researchers create fair data and data sharing, just even when they're thinking about the experiments and the work that they want to do. And it's tough because, you know, the concept of data sharing for a synthetic organic chemist is going to be really different from a clinician. And so it's really kind of a hard thing to satisfy, but I do think that we can make some progress, and I love your thoughts.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan. Yeah, I'm Oliver He. I'm the local host and co-chair of the meeting. So thank you for your wonderful talk. Very inspiring, and I feel exciting about your talk. And yeah, you are our University of Michigan alumnus. So I'm very glad to know. So yeah, definitely welcome to visit our Ann Arbor again anytime. And then, yeah, secondary, I want to say, like, I want to make a comment, like, ontologies have been there for at least a couple of decades, like since 2000, right? Like the gene ontology coming, like, very popular, and we all follow up. And then now we have Arbor Foundry. And initially, I was thinking it's more like a relatively small community, but now you can see the community is becoming bigger and bigger. And its importance has been recognized by more and more, and now by NIH as well as a common sense. And it's so important for the data integration, the data fairness, and the sharing and the analysis, adverse analysis. So I'm so glad that NIH has been funding so many projects to it. Very exciting. And then lastly, yeah, I just want to make a comment. Want to make a thank you, because I see in your slide that you put the violin 2.0, you know, it's your funding project. So yeah, I'm the content PI for the project. Yeah, I'm here local in Michigan. Thank you very much. So I want to make my personal thank you notes for you. Thank you very much for your support.
Well, congratulations, and we're happy to support all of the ontology work that's coming into NIH and particularly your work. So thank you for that. I'm glad to see the work going forward.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question.
Hi, Susan. My name
Hi.
is Marabande. I'm a clinician. I work with a lot of clinical data. And one of the things that I was curious about is where does standards like US CDI, which is US core data for interoperability and things like those kind of efforts fit into this?
Oh, that's a great question. We had a recent notice out to investigators to enhance the use of US CDI and their standards. I've been talking a little bit with Mickey Trapacki about how we can integrate the US CDI standards, which are very clinical and almost to the healthcare side, with the work that we're doing in the common data elements, which is sort of how clinicians funded through NIH think about data standards. They really do think about these common data elements. I think that there's work that we can do. We haven't made too much progress between US CDI and CDEs, but one of the things we have been making a lot of progress on that I didn't think to talk about, which is the use of FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperable Resources. Mostly this is NCATS, but not exclusively. They've mapped all the different data models, ITB2, Sentinel, PCORI, to OMAP2. I think it's OMAP 5.0 because that's the same OMAP model that all of us uses, and we actually link data, or we are linking data across COVID, N3C, and all of us. So there's some work that we've been doing in terms of mapping CDEs to the FHIR standard and mapping, and this is not easy, phenotypic data to the OMAP standard. So I think maybe there's some room there for FHIR and the work for US CDI and CDEs. That's still to be determined, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can further enhance the US CDI standards for clinical research.
I'm not involved on a daily basis kind of thing with the FHIR side of standards bodies, but I work more with clinical guidelines in which we use FHIR data exhaustively, and also the terminology, open data standards from a terminology side, right? From like SNOMED, LOINC, RX norm, ICP, and all those. So and one of the things that is becoming more important is to connect this to genomic data. And this is where I feel like there are some gaps here. And also from, you gave a very nice overview of all the efforts that are going in, but they seem to be more from the research aspects.
Yes.
Unless we connect them to the clinical side of things, making it a reality for clinical care, right, still becomes a something that we're still searching for, right, in a distant future. So Absolutely. How do we make this a reality? And we need to cross that chasm there, right?
I completely agree. We're all into FHIR thinking that might be the right secret sauce to make that connection. But you're right. I think emerge and maybe phenopackets are maybe the two areas where we're trying to bridge that genomics phenotype to the data, the format of the data that the healthcare providers like, which is going to be, in some kind of standard like OMAP, for example, or Sentinel. And the hope is that FHIR would be that bridging activity. I just want to make a plug for all of us because I just heard from Josh Denny that they just got FDA approval to provide genomics reports to all of us participants. So there might be some linkage there between all of us and how they can work with healthcare providers in the genomics side. So that there's some hope, but not solved.
I hope there's more funding in that area.
Me too.
All right, thank you, Susan.
Yeah, so I actually, Susan, I take a privilege of that we work together. I ask you some hard questions.
Yeah, that's great discussion. I really wish I was there.
Yeah, I hope we can have a kind of roundtable discussion, because there are things that I think not I, including some other people I heard from this conference, some participants, some they are not all here. So the phenomenon of all those different ontologies, CDEs, data models existing is because of NIH funded the projects that creates all those different CDEs that make the downstream work, harmonization work become more harder. So what is, you are the data science strategy office and you coordinate with all other ICs. So what is your strategy to reduce the creation of all those reinvent the wheel, and to really make meaningful semantic relationships among the different data elements we are seeing? We are not, in our ontology world, we really don't like data, common data element and the common data model, but that is a reality. So that is the first question. Second question is, I also heard from this conference that although we have a lot of investment towards AI and machine learning, AI and machine learning has their inherent limitations. So have NIH thought about it, and what's your strategy? So I have two questions. One is CDEs, second is AI and ML.
Yeah, those are great questions. And common data elements has been something that a lot of our studies and our research colleagues have been utilizing for a very long time. And so it's a culture that's ingrained in our research enterprise. So, the goal is really to make more effective use of, if we're going to collect common data elements, which is a query, question, and then a response answer, to make that more effective is really the need to think about looking at those and from a semantic structure. That hasn't happened because it's been a cataloging event. And so there needs to be some meeting of the minds, and that might be a great type of workshop to think about. How do you actually take these existing things and really make better use of them through some modern approaches to semantics? And I think that would be a wonderful workshop that we could probably engage in. If you're reading the budget for congressional budgets for FY23, I bet you're going to see some language in there about that. So that will be exciting for this community for sure. And the second question was around more effective AI technologies and tools.
The limitations of AI and ML.
So some of the things that, and there's plenty of limitations in terms of computing and technology and infrastructure, but there's also really interesting limitations in terms of bias in data sets or in training. And so there's a great study. It was by IBM. I think they had 7 million patients. They're looking at postpartum depression. They're looking across different racial groups and different social economic standards to see the uptick of healthcare for postpartum depression. And what they find is that African Americans are more likely to suffer postpartum depression. But the reality is that it's not a racial thing, it's a social economical activity. So what happened is that even though they had a very large data set, the data set was quite biased in terms of who's actually engaging in mental health services because of postpartum depression. And so understanding when your data is biased from the onset of the development of the algorithm is really, really important, and not always so easy. It's not just about having super large sets of data. It's about having a complete set of data that can answer the question that you're asking it. There's going to be some really interesting work going on at DOE that I'm probably going to follow in terms of setting up ways in which the community can validate data sets and models. I think it's called Improve. I'm pretty sure it's called Improve. That's something to be following so that you can actually have some benchmarking, and that will start to address your question, as what is the limitations of AI? You can only address that if you understand stand it from sort of a quantitative point of view. So I'll be interested to follow what happens with DOE and in the Improve project.
Yeah, so we are actually coming from another angle because the machine learning is numerical model mathematics, and we are building ontologies which has semantics. But I will report back to you, and we can continue the discussion. Yeah,
That
because
sounds
I realize we are over time, and I have to leave at 10:30.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming
so
to
much.
us.
Absolutely. I'll hang out as long as I can, and I appreciate it. And I hope that I can come back soon.
If you're done, you're done. But yeah, I did have a question.
Oh, we have another keynote speaker, Chris. He wants to ask you a question.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to.
Hi, Susan. Chris Stock here. Thanks for taking this question. It's maybe a hard one. So I've been involved in standards, and I've been on NIH review panels, and I've been editors for journals. And I think one of the major hurdles for having good practices come into play are the reviewers themselves. So you can write the RFAs, you can say, these are all the things that you need to do. You can say, these are all the requirements. But if the people reviewing the grants or the papers have their own biases and say, well, I like CDEs, I think you should make your own, then that all gets subverted. So I think that's a really important area to be addressed. Well, how do you do it? Well, maybe one way is to have people, who are junior faculty or whatever, or even senior faculty who are in this community, be solicited for these review panels so that they're able to stand there and say, no, CDEs are bad. This is what you should be doing. So I'd just like to share that problem about the inherent biases of people on the review panels, and maybe getting some of the ontologists involved in those reviews.
That is a great suggestion. I completely agree. And I hope that that the community will participate in the reviews and sit on panels. It really does take putting people on those panels to actually make the culture change. And that's where it's been challenging.